My name is Eleanor Mayfield. I'm 38, software consultant by trade, married into the Lennox family, an old money dynasty in Pennsylvania that runs on power, appearances, and the kind of polished cruelty you only recognize after it's cut you. I grew up in a town where we measured success by steady work and dinner on the table. The Lennoxes? They measure it by who they can outmaneuver before breakfast. From the moment I said I do to Isaac Lennox, I knew I wasn't marrying into a family. I was entering a system, and systems like theirs don't bend. They absorb. I wasn't foolish enough to expect affection, but I thought effort would count for something. So I kept quiet, kept useful. In every room, I listened more than I spoke. I showed up, solved problems, smiled when ignored. It started with a call from Astrid, my mother-in-law, on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was honeyed, sweet in a way that told me she wanted something. "Eleanor," she said, "you're the only one who'll understand this tech nonsense. Would you come by the house later? It's important." There was that pause, the kind that says more than the words themselves, not a request, a placement, like a pawn on a board. Isaac said nothing when I told him, just blinked. He had a way of disappearing without leaving the room, a detachment I used to mistake for calm. Now I see it for what it is, disengagement polished to the point of luxury. By that afternoon, I was seated across from Astrid in her sunroom. She slid a thick folder across the glass table, foreign investment, merger possibilities, numbers that didn't align. "It's a $2 billion opportunity," she said, watching my face. "But it's a maze. We need a brain like yours." There it was again, the sugar before the salt. She didn't say it out loud, but I knew. I was to attend the meetings, nod quietly, and do the work behind the scenes. No credit, no recognition. Just assist. For 2 weeks, I lived inside that deal. I combed through contracts till my eyes burned. I flagged inconsistencies, forecasted risk scenarios, even prepped talking points Astrid later parroted in boardrooms. I didn't mind, at first. I told myself it was a contribution, that what mattered was impact, not applause. Then the press release dropped. Lennox Tech, a newly valued giant at $2 billion. Photos of Astrid and her executive team. Isaac stood beside her, looking vaguely confused, as always. My name? Nowhere. The following Monday, she called again. "Could you stop by around 10? Just something quick." I assumed it was a follow-up, maybe, naively, a thank you. Her office smelled like orchids and old money. She smiled when I walked in, broad, bright, too much. "Eleanor," she cooed, "you were incredible, truly." I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already standing, already reaching behind her desk. She handed me a feather duster. "Isaac's desk is a mess," she said without breaking eye contact. "Could you tidy it before lunch?" I stared at her. Something in my chest stopped moving. My hand took the duster, but my mind started burning. I wasn't the help. I wasn't her intern. I was her daughter-in-law, a professional, a human being. Astrid's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed when I didn't move fast enough. "You're not one of us, Eleanor," she said, her voice dipping low. "Don't confuse usefulness with belonging." I didn't speak, didn't cry. I just walked out with that duster in hand like it meant something. Upstairs, I found Isaac's desk just as she said. Papers, receipts, old flash drives scattered like a life half-lived. I began to clean, not because I was obeying her, but because my mind needed something to focus on, something to hold so I didn't scream. I wiped, stacked, filed. Then I found it, wedged beneath an old portfolio. A contract. Thick, stamped, official. My name was on it, except the signature wasn't mine. I sat in Isaac's study long after dusk, the house quiet except for the hum of the HVAC and distant crickets. The drawer was slightly ajar, as though inviting me to see what was hidden. I pulled the contract free, texture cold under my fingertips. My name was there, with a signature that looked too clean, too deliberate, a signature I never made. I'm not naive. I've seen enough forged documents in my years in tech to see the inconsistencies. The metadata timestamps were off by minutes, font spacing imperfect. It wasn't a simple edit. It was a forgery. I'd been set up to own something I never agreed to. Betrayal sting cut slow. How long had it been in there? Before she asked me to help, before I ever stepped foot into her boardroom. That night, I joined the family at dinner. The dining room was candlelit, soft chatter filling the corners. Astrid spoke about the charity gala they planned next month. Isaac asked me casually whether I'd help organize the garage cleanup this weekend. I swallowed. When I tried to bring up the contract, Isaac murmured, "Let's not ruin the vibe." Dash across the table smirked like he held a secret. The words went unsaid but loaded air. I watched them, all of them, speak with measured silence. Their eyes flicked to me and away. The weight of their omission pressed on my chest. Should I voice it now? Or stay silent, collect proof until the moment is mine? I promised myself I wouldn't cry tonight. A memory surfaced from months ago. Astrid had called me into the garden room, sunlit with wisteria overhead. She poured wine, told me of her vision. "This will elevate all of us, Eleanor." She spoke of legacy, loyalty, gratitude. She said, "You'll thank me one day." I believed her. Now I taste betrayal on her lips. Back in my own place later that evening, I photographed the contract. The footer read a law firm I'd never heard of. I Googled the address, an empty lot linked to a Lennox associate. Then, in my email archive, I found a string of auto-forward replies, messages I never sent, allegedly approving that contract. Someone inside had framed me. My pulse echoed through my ears. This wasn't a favor. It was an erasure. I tucked the evidence into my bag, closed everything down, and whispered to the empty room. They didn't just use me. They erased me. 2 days had passed since I found the forged contract in Isaac's drawer, and my head was still spinning with unspoken truths. That afternoon, I left the Lennox estate under the guise of running errands and met Diane at a small cafe in downtown Philly, far from the surveillance and curated politeness of Astrid's mansion. The place smelled like fresh pastries and espresso. Wooden floors creaked underfoot, and a jazz tune played soft in the background. There was warmth here. It reminded me of the life I had before I traded it for silk tablecloths and icy dinner conversations. Diane, sharp as ever, arrived in jeans and a leather satchel slung across her shoulder. I shared just enough about the contract, left out names, framed it like a hypothetical scenario. She listened quietly, then leaned back with a sigh. "Wealth doesn't change character," she said. "It amplifies it." I stared into my cup, her words settling like sediment at the bottom. I'd let them surround me, isolate me. Slowly tighten the circle until I no longer recognized my own voice in any of it. By the time I left the cafe, the sunlight had started to slip behind the rooftops. As I drove back, one thought kept pulsing. I've been playing their game. It's time to play mine. Pulling up to the estate, something felt different. Astrid's assistant greeted me in the foyer and handed me a new set of keys. "For privacy," she said, smiling like it was normal. I didn't ask questions, not yet. Back in my guest room, the locks had indeed been changed. Subtle, insulting. Dash passed me in the hallway shortly after, drink in hand, and said with a wink, "Big sacrifices don't go unnoticed around here." He wasn't talking about the garage. I began tracing patterns. Emails I didn't send. Calls that dropped mid-sentence. My access to shared drives had been revoked for security compliance. They weren't careless. They were calculated. My gut told me this wasn't paranoia. This was surveillance. And this time, I wouldn't ignore it. "Fool me once, shame on you," I muttered, locking my door behind me. "Fool me twice." I retrieved an old external drive from my suitcase, one I hadn't plugged in since my consulting days. Buried inside were full backups of original software agreements and emails, each one with a timestamp. When I found the original IP authorization draft, with no signature, I nearly laughed from relief. "Trust, but verify," I whispered, saving duplicates onto hidden cloud drives. I started building a timeline. Every request, every version of the contract, every communication. I wasn't going to confront them with emotion. I was going to bury them with proof. Later that evening, I stepped into the hallway for air and heard soft sobbing. Down the corridor, near the service entrance, a young woman, Claire, was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I recognized her as Astrid's new intern. I crouched down beside her and handed her a tissue from my purse. "You okay?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "It's just, she told me I wasn't smart enough to finish the budget summary," she whispered, then gave it to Dash and said it was his work all along. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. It was like looking into a younger version of myself, still eager to prove, not yet jaded. When she mentioned the investor event next week, where Astrid planned to present the merger as Isaac and Dash's triumph, I felt my pulse slow into something sharper, more focused. They had set the stage. All I had to do was pull the curtain. I glanced down the hallway, then back at Claire. "I need one small favor," I said, my voice steady. She paused, then whispered, "If I do this, you'll protect me, right?" Astrid's invitation arrived that morning, formal stationery, embossed with the Lennox crest. "Your input," it read. I held it at my kitchen table while the sunlight flickered through curtains, heart pounding. Was it praise? Or another trap? I slipped into the mansion's marble halls, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to whisper lineage and loyalty. Each step felt like walking onto someone else's stage. She met me in her study with that fragile smile. She poured tea. She commented casually on the weather, on the orchids, before sliding into the conversation about the contract. "I trust your wisdom, Eleanor." The tone was warm, until she added, "But a desk must be orderly before a new operator arrives." Her eyes flickered, her motherly mask cracked. I forced calm into my voice as I asked quietly, "Operator? Of what?" She diverted, complimented my diligence. The missing photograph caught my eye behind her. The silence in the room tasted like betrayal. She picked up a framed photo of the merger, and I smiled inwardly. "Only I was missing. A tribute piece," she said, symbolic. But I remembered that photo. Me taking it, standing at the center. She swapped it out, replaced it with one of Dash alone. My chest tightened. The erasure wasn't oversight, it was deliberate. After she excused herself, I remained. My gaze fell on a file folder askew on her desk. I reached for it. Inside, I found draft memos and reports credited to Dash but bearing my internal notes. One line read plainly, "Credit to D. Lennox." I froze. Then I heard her behind me, carrying a glass of water, stepping quietly. She said softly, "I hope you feel recognized soon." Her smile was sharp now, empty, hollow. My hand shook holding that folder. My name echoed in every margin. And then I knew she had leaked my work, swapped frames, twisted stories. The mask slipped, and I saw her clearly. The next evening, we drove down to the Cape May estate. Salt air clung to the windows, and the sound of the ocean came faint through the heavy curtains. Astrid called it a rehearsal dinner, her way of dressing up control. The house was bigger, colder than Philadelphia. No warmth in the marble, just echoes of money. We gathered at a long table polished like a mirror. Isaac sat on my right, Dash on my left. They spoke of teamwork and alignment, their voices smooth, corporate, as though I were an intern instead of the one who saved their merger. Dash leaned close and said, almost like an aside, "You might want to lay low at the event. Keep the family narrative clean." My jaw clenched. I put my fork down, looked at each of them, and said evenly, "I didn't work in the shadows to stay in them." Across the table, Astrid's smile thinned. "Be careful, Eleanor," she said softly. "Not everyone survives exposure." Later, Isaac asked me to walk with him by the beach where he had once proposed. The tide hissed on wet sand as we walked. He tried to sound gentle. "Don't ruin this. You're already family. Isn't that enough?" The moon lit his profile, and I saw nothing of the man I once loved. "I know about the contract," I said. His face tightened. "You always wanted in. Now you're in." His words were a blade. He went on. If I went public, they had ways of discrediting me, painting me as unstable. "Gaslighting's an art form in families like this," I said under my breath. He didn't answer. The wind off the ocean was colder than it should have been in May. Back in the estate, I moved quietly, methodically packing my things. I locked my laptop, sealed my drives, and texted Claire. Plan moves to phase 2. Don't talk to anyone. My pulse slowed. I thought of my father once telling me, if someone tries to silence your truth, it's because they fear its power. I opened a blank folder on my desktop, titled it, For the Press, just in case, and started dropping files in. My hands didn't shake. I felt the shift inside me, from wounded to resolute. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman erased by a smile. At dawn, I passed Astrid's office. Her door was half open. She was on the phone with a board member, her voice a low purr. "She's an emotional liability," she said. I pressed record on my phone, standing still. She laughed lightly. "She won't do anything. She needs us." My grip on the phone tightened. They'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. I stepped away and whispered to myself, "Not anymore." In my room, I emailed myself the audio, subject line, "Final proof. Do not delete." They thought they'd seen me play defense. They hadn't seen me on offense. 2 nights later, I sat at my small desk in Philadelphia, script pages stacked neatly beside my laptop. It was supposed to be my night. The investor dinner would give me 5 minutes at the podium, 5 minutes to stake my name to what I'd built. I'd polished every line, trimmed every phrase down to truth. Then the phone rang. Astrid's assistant, voice clipped and rehearsed. "I'm sorry, but your slot's been removed." She said it like a weather report. The silence after the call felt like a door closing. I stared at the words I'd written. They weren't just sentences anymore. They were evidence. I whispered a line to the empty room. "Silence imposed is the loudest tyranny." My father's words echoed. If they took the stage from me, I'd bring the stage to them. That was the moment I stopped rehearsing. An hour later, Claire's name lit up on my screen. She'd forwarded me an email chain titled, "Credit where it's due." My hands went cold as I read. Internal staff grumbling about erasing my work. One line jumped. "We write for Eleanor, you know it." They weren't just stealing credit, they were manufacturing a false story. Shock gave way to a slow burn of vindication. Someone inside was still human. Claire had risked her job sending this. I took screenshots, hid the original. Ammunition. My first real proof that the cracks ran deeper than me. By midnight, my apartment glowed only by the laptop screen. I'd been cross-checking contract drafts against internal asset ledgers for hours, tracing lines like veins. Then I found it. A ledger entry assigning a 5% equity share to Lena, my old alias from consulting days, quietly transferred to Dash. It was more than credit theft. It was theft, period. Ownership, siphoned away while I was smiling for their photos. My spine stiffened. This wasn't just about standing on stage anymore. This was about taking back what was mine, in law and in name. The next morning, I met Claire at a small diner off Broad Street. She sat hunched over a coffee, eyes darting toward the door. "I saved meeting minutes," she said, sliding a flash drive across. "They're planning to credit Dash next week." She tried to smile, but her hand trembled. I covered it with mine. "You're safe. I'll never let them erase you too." She nodded, tears in her eyes. I tucked the drive into my bag. Phase 2. Evidence. It felt heavier than any weapon. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, face draining of color, and showed me the screen. A text from Astrid. "You and Eleanor must decide. Now." 2 days passed. Long ones. I barely slept. When I did, I saw blank spaces, rooms full of people talking around me, through me, but not to me. That night, I walked into the investor gala wearing a dark tailored suit. No jewelry, no distractions, just purpose. The ballroom shimmered with overhead chandeliers, champagne glasses clicking like polite applause. Investors floated through the room, dressed in silk and strategy. Cameras flashed. I saw Isaac first, smiling like nothing was fractured. Then Astrid, in a silver gown that reflected light but cast shadows. She raised a glass. To family, to vision, to the future. And when she named names, she named Dash. She named Isaac. But not mine. My heart beat steady, not fast, just steady. I stood a few feet from the podium, pretending to study the program. In my head, they want me to sit down, but I came here to stand up. Then came the next sting. Dash stepped up for his turn, faux humility thick in his voice. This journey wasn't easy, he said. We had backups, contingencies, and Eleanor, she was the backup plan. It slipped out. Quiet, but loud enough. Enough for a few heads to turn. I saw one woman raise her brows. A man's smirk tightened into a question. Astrid didn't flinch at first, but her hand gripped her wine glass just a little harder. I stepped forward, not raised voice, just clear. Plans, I said to the room, are only as strong as the people who make them. It was like someone cut the music. A hush fell. I didn't need to say more. I let the silence speak louder than words ever could. Later, I slipped backstage, past the velvet rope, down the corridor toward the staff table. I reached into my bag and pulled out the framed photograph. The real one. Me, front and center, merger night, the original image, untouched by Astrid's revisionist art. I found the event photographer. He tilted his head, frowning. This was archived, he said. Tagged as unused. Weird, it's a good shot. Back near the main hallway, I walked up to Astrid, held the frame at chest level. You left something out, I said. She didn't even blink, just took her napkin and wiped a fleck of dust from the glass. You know how messy history gets, she said, cold and calm. I felt the sting, but not the kind that makes you cry, the kind that crystallizes your spine. No anger in my voice, just steadiness. You erased me, but I kept copies. She didn't reply, but her knuckles whitened on the edge of her clutch. Back out in the ballroom, I circled the guest table, scanning the nameplates. Mine wasn't there, not a card, not a placeholder. I walked straight to the coordinator. I'd like my name added. Now. She hesitated. Looked toward Astrid. As if on cue, Astrid stepped in. We decided to omit it this time, she said. Smooth, polished, final. I pulled out the printed invitation from my bag, held it up. My name's right here. And then I raised my voice just enough for the crowd to hear. I wasn't invited here to be invisible. There it was. The shift. Conversations stalled, eyes turned, cameras clicked. Astrid's face, so composed a minute ago, flushed crimson. She leaned to her earpiece, whispering something tight and clipped. I didn't look away. I felt the room tip, and I smiled. 48 hours later, I was in a downtown office tower in Manhattan. No pretense, no second guessing. I sat across from Helen Ward, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, calm as a surgeon. Her firm had handled some of the biggest corporate whistleblower cases in the country. She didn't blink when I slid over the folders. Contracts, internal emails, scanned ledgers, audio clips, photos. A timeline printed and annotated in red ink, all of it laid out like chess pieces. She scanned in silence, then leaned back. You've built a solid wall, she said. Now all we need is the battering ram. She walked me through the charges: IP fraud, asset redirection, breach of contract, falsified records, intentional defamation, things they buried under charm and branding. She asked if I wanted to proceed. I don't want revenge, I told her. I want restoration. Helen nodded. Then we initiate pre-litigation notice. We give them one last chance to settle quietly, before we take this public. I signed the papers. She looked at me once more. You're not suing your family, Eleanor. You're restoring your name. Later that afternoon, I sat in a tiny media lounge inside a cafe in Brooklyn. Not fancy. Wood walls, old floors, couches that sank too deep. Across from me sat Harper Quinn, senior editor at an independent news site with teeth. Claire had connected us. Harper was her friend from undergrad, now rising fast in the world of investigative media. I handed over a USB. What's this? She asked. Everything. We reviewed it. She typed. I talked. We built a map. Dates, emails, screenshots, timelines. Claire's identity scrubbed. Other names blurred. Truth protected. Not diluted. Harper read the proposed headline. The Invisible Woman Who Engineered a $1 billion Deal. She shook her head. Let's call it what it is. Theft in high heels. I didn't smile, but something in my chest settled. Yeah, this story goes live in 72 hours, she said. Unless they cave. You good with that? I'm not hiding anymore, I said. Let them scramble. We shook hands. Not like a contract, like two soldiers passing a weapon. That evening, back in my apartment, I drafted the notice letter, sent it to Helen. She had it couriered to the Lennox family legal team. Title, Restitution or Ruin. The response came within hours. Astrid called me directly. Eleanor, this isn't how family does things. I stayed quiet. You should have come to us first. We could have handled this, quietly, like adults. You already did, I said. Now I'm handling it like a professional. There was a pause. Then the shift. You're emotional. No, I said. I'm prepared. She tried again. You're sabotaging everything. You'll regret this. I breathed through it, then answered slowly. I built the bridge. I'm allowed to burn it. She ended the call. And I knew it was all recorded. Admissible. Framed. The next morning, I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The article went live. Early. Someone inside the company must have leaked it. By 10:12 a.m., it was trending. By 11:47, a board member had stepped down. At 1:30, an emergency investor call was announced. A new headline read, Queenmaker or Credit Thief. My phone lit up with texts. Claire, it's happening. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the headlines, not celebrating, just breathing. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. But the name tagged by the app stopped me. Isaac. Reconsidering. I held the phone in my hand, not moving, not answering, just staring at it, unsure if what was coming next was hope or bait. 2 weeks had passed since the storm. I sat across from Isaac in a quiet Brooklyn cafe, the kind with chipped ceramic mugs and dusty old jazz humming from the ceiling. He looked different, not just tired, smaller somehow, like time had compressed him. He folded his hands on the table, not touching the coffee he'd ordered. I should have called you a long time ago, he said, eyes down. I believed Mom. I believed what was easiest. I didn't interrupt. I was wrong. You didn't deserve any of it. He exhaled hard. If there's a way to mediate this, quietly, I'm offering to help. For what it's worth. I stirred my drink once, twice, then stopped. Some things once lost shouldn't be found again. He nodded. No protest. I accept your apology, I said, but not the proposal. I'm not going back to what broke me. He looked like he understood, maybe for the first time. I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and left without waiting for him to finish his sentence. The next morning, Helen called with news. The Lennox family had agreed to a full settlement, undisclosed financial terms, public correction issued through a corporate statement, all signed, sealed, legally binding. My legal team urged a press push, interviews, podcasts, a chance to tell the world. I chose a different path. A short piece ran in a small column. Anonymous founder of 2B deal wins restitution. No photo, no quotes, just truth. Simplified. That afternoon, I walked past the building I'd once entered every weekday at 8:27 a.m., coffee in hand, eyes on the glass doors. People bustled in and out now. No one knew me, no one paused, and that, somehow, felt freeing. Claire quit the same day. We met at the corner of a park and walked, arms linked. So, she asked, what now? We write the contracts first, I said. This time, no one forgets the architect. The following weekend, I visited my parents for dinner. Mom hugged me before I even made it up the porch stairs, longer than she ever had. Dad didn't say much, just patted my shoulder, then wiped his glasses more than needed. In my childhood room that night, I opened a dusty box of old journals. Flipping through the pages, I saw scribbles from a girl who thought being silent was the only way to survive. Now I knew better. I applied for a public grant, a small project focused on funding women-led ventures in communities that never got boardroom access, not to make noise, but to make change. And then, one quiet morning, I received another letter. Astrid's lawyer. I didn't open it. I placed it in a drawer with a slow breath. She didn't own the last word anymore. Later that week, I stood backstage at a conference hall uptown, a panel on women in tech equity. Claire was already on stage, moderating. The applause died down. My name was called. As I stepped out, I caught sight of Astrid, standing in the back row, hands folded, face unreadable. She didn't approach, and I didn't flinch. I walked to the mic. "I was erased once," I began. "Today, I leave my signature." The audience rose to their feet. Not all of them knew the story, but they saw something, heard something that resonated. Truth doesn't need a name to be recognized. Backstage, as I sipped water and listened to the next speaker, Claire slipped me a note, handwritten, folded twice. "You've changed the game. Let's build one together. Claire." I held the note for a long time, and for the first time in years, I believed I could trust again.